Good evening, everyone. We'll try to make it interactive. We'll try to make it chit-chatty so that it's not boring. And I can see the energy levels are down because we are at the end of the day. But we'll try to share as much as information and not to make you sleep. Trust me, we'll try that. All right, I would like to invite all our panelists on the stage, starting with Dr. Keith, Dr. Alex. Then we have Boris, Mr. Joshi, and Mr. Fahad. All right. Please take a seat.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today for this panel. So for everyone, we're going to be talking about regulatory compliances, how the regulatory compliances which are related to the standards can be up to date. So we would start off with our first question, that how exactly the regulatory bodies in different countries, different geographies can update or can keep the standards up to date. So we'll start off with Dr. Kenneth.
Sure, thank you. I'm Kenneth Geers. I spent 20 years in the US government and now 10 years in startups in cybersecurity. So it's an honor to be here, thank you. So I think that the multi-stakeholder approach is obviously the first thing you want to think about, especially when you cross borders, because you have to have the consumers get a voice. And companies shouldn't want more out of the consumers than the consumers feel like they're getting out of the companies, right? The companies have to abide by the rules and regulations within each country, but of course, at the border is where the laws typically stop. So when we're talking about the international environment, I honestly, this is one of the best examples I can imagine. I've met people from so many countries over the past couple of days here, and it's wonderful to hear all of the different accents and to hear all the different perspectives. And I think it's a matter of truly adopting the multi-stakeholder approach when it comes to crossing borders.
Yeah. How about you, Dr. Alex?
Hi, Alex Constantinidis, Group CISO at QNB. I have been involved in cybersecurity since being 12 years old and hacking into things. From my side, I think that at the moment there are not enough regulations governing the whole industry. So we have regulations in the financial and services industry across the world, and I think that those are very much unified. The security standards you find in Europe, you find in Saudi, and you find in other places are very kind of similar. But in other industries, there are simply no standards. And for me, the biggest issue is that we have no standards and no regulation on the actual companies that create the software and the hardware that we all have to use. And this is one of the reasons why we keep on having security vulnerabilities discovered on a daily basis. The number of vulnerabilities is increasing over time, it's not decreasing. Our developers are not writing better code, so I think that we need more regulation in that space.
Right. Mr. Boris, please introduce yourself and then.
I'm Boris Hajduk. I'm representing Indonesia today because I work for the largest tech company in Indonesia. It's basically Amazon for Indonesia coupled with Uber for Indonesia altogether. We're the largest tech company by far, and we do about 2% of GDP for the entire country. When you are systematically important, the regulators look at you, even when you're not regulated. If you're an e-commerce, the regulation is low pressure. Even for a Uber style, the regulation is only mild. But when you are systematically important, you attract the attention. Your failures more than your successes. And so when you have one of the companies having trouble in public, it's an opportunity for the regulator to actually step up and look at, hey, how do we help the company succeed as a forcing function to invest and to force innovation, while at the same time trying to limit any pressure on growth. We need, in Indonesia, we need the controls to be there, but we need also to accompany the country towards more and more growth. This is a developing economy where we want to encourage the growth of the economy. So I think it relates a little bit with some of the economies in the region.
Yeah. Mr. Mihir.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I'm Mihir Joshi. I'm Group CISO of TATA Power. Normally what happens is that when it comes to the policy, keeping the guidelines and standards up to date, before we make any policies or develop, it is very important to know the players. When we know the players, it is also important to know their desired actions. And at the same time, according to that, we need to have a desired outcomes. Normally what happens is that whenever any new technologies, be it crypto, be it blockchain, or be it Gen AI, the policy makers, they wait for the mass adoption of the technology. And once the technology is out there, being used by each and every organizations, that's where the policymakers will start developing the policies or the guidelines and the standards. But then what happens is, the policy and the guidelines made after that, after the mass adoption, it is something like one-size-fits-all approach, but that doesn't work. So to ensure that we update those policies according to the technologies, it is better to be well aligned with the business, to be well aligned with the technology innovators, so that the policy guidelines and the technology can go hand in hand, rather than waiting for the mass adoption. Over to you.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Fahad Qathani. I am the Director of Industrial Control System with NEOM. Regarding your question regarding the standardization, I will look at it from different point of view, from the driver of these rapid needs of developing the standardization. I want to state a fact regarding the cybersecurity in the digital age, the obsoleteness of the knowledge and the rapid evolution of the cyber attack threat landscape, mandating the regulatory, industry, and the customers to collaborate together to addressing these quickly and evolving issues. So it's not one entity's responsibilities. It should be at this level of technology evolution. It should be as teamwork efforts more than like individual efforts. And I'm seconding my colleague here when he said the policies coming after technology adoption. At the time they developing the policies will be irrelevant to the next technology. So this is my
Thank you so much. Now, for you, Alex, I will start with you. What mechanisms can be put in place so that if an organization breaches any of those regulatory compliances, there are some actions which can be put in place. So what can those be?
So I think, again, at the moment, there are only very few regulated industries for which standards exist. So for those regulated industries, there's already a very fixed plan. So if you breach a regulatory requirement from a financial regulator, you can be subject to fines. I think that there should be more, again, going back to my previous point, I think that there should be more regulation on the companies that make the software. So what we're seeing is we're seeing some regulatory standards, but regulatory standards, even for the financial sector, are setting just a minimum bar. In order to have a secure environment, you are expected to exceed this bar. Just being compliant does not mean that you're secure. So you need to invest in additional things and make the configurations even harder. I think that if we're going to have more regulation in other industries, again, software industry, for example, or the industry that creates and installs the software in our environment, they should also have the same obligations, and they should also be subject to fines and anything else if they do a misconfiguration.
Right. Mr. Mihir?
Yep. Okay, so what happens is, like, the rule of the law, it cannot start with a clean slate, right? Now, before we link the accountability for the violations, it is very important to prioritize. Say, for example, there has been a guideline where it includes 80 controls for the organization. Out of 80 controls, we are fully aligned to, say, 40 or 50, but the remaining 30 controls we are not aligned to. Now, for those remaining 30 controls, rather than a kind of a penalty for the violation, it is very important that the policy maker and the organization come together. They discuss about those 30 controls which are not aligned to the regulatory guidelines. Now, For us, for any organization to link the accountability for the violations, first it is important that what is the current state of those 30 controls, what is the impact if we are not aligned to them, and in case if we have any mitigatory controls and how we are reducing the risk. After that, once that 3 factors has been considered, the second thing would be discuss that with the policy maker. And if doing certain things, if we are mitigating the risk too low, then those violations which are not linked to the standard guidelines, it can be put or maybe parked somewhere rather than penalizing the organization. The reason behind that is that for the large scale organization, it would be very easy to comply to all the regulations compared to the small size organization which has been into a startup industry from last 5 years. So it is better that if we can have a representative from the policy maker, and if we can have a quarterly meeting with those, one of the representatives, we can showcase them that what we are aligned to and what we are not, so that there will be a kind of a transparency between the organization and the policy maker. And that's how the accountability can be set in a way where there is transparency, there is a visibility, and also we know the current state of the guidelines. Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Boris?
I want to react a little bit. Regulators' role is to manage a market, to make it fair, to make it successful on the long term. And so a small failure here and there is part of the business. If you don't have failures, you don't invest fast enough, I would say. I just want to showcase something that is, I guess, invisible from this region. A few days ago in Singapore, the regulator for banks forced the biggest bank of the country to stop innovating, saying, hey, you're taking too much risk, you have availability problems, security problems. The major, most important bank in Singapore is forced to stop innovation for 6 months, no M&A, no innovation, no new products, fix the basics, and in 6 months, a new evaluation will start again. And so, yes, of course, fines are efficient and a driving function, but having a forcing function about giving a chance to the controls to be operational rather than run after innovation. Singapore took this bet a few days ago, and I think that's the first regulator that I see take this action.
A follow-up question on that. Now, we're talking about that we need to maintain these regulatory compliances, we have to put some fines on it. But there's another side to it. How can we make sure the organizations self-regulate themselves? They're motivated to do it. So, if you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the organizations, again, financial service organizations, they need to demonstrate to their customers that they're secure places and that they are the places that people can trust them with their money, with their savings, with their business. So we have an obligation to self-regulate ourselves, so we do not always wait for a regulator to tell us you should protect your systems from virus attacks, for example. We are already looking into the market, we're looking into how hacks happen, how do other organizations get attacked, and we take those steps proactively. So I think that you have to be more on the lookout for what is happening in the industry in general, not just wait for a regulator to come and throw a book on your head to say you must do this. People must have their own responsibility and their own drive. I think that regulation helps us sometimes when it comes to budget approvals, because sometimes when you're trying to introduce a new control into a company, you have a lot of resistance from the business, from different parts of the organization. So the moment that you have a regulation, that helps you to get the budget and get the buy-in from different parts.
Yeah, agree. Yes, please.
One of the trends I've seen in the US over the past few years is that companies see security as a selling point, and they choose to highlight their level of compliance clearly on their website, and the number of certified personnel, etc. But they want to articulate to their customers that they're taking standards and regulations and compliance seriously by saying we're investing in security, therefore you should be one of our customers.
Yeah. Mr. Fahad?
Yes, I want to point out regarding the self-regulating organization. This is, first of all, it is not IT responsibility anymore. We're seeing like health sectors, chemicals, governmental, financial sectors being digitalized, and that's falling in their laps. They should take full responsibility and ownership to self-regulate them and taking this sector to the level of maturity and collaborating with the government agencies to co-regulating these practices. I don't see it as it's an individual responsibility. The proponent, they should forcing the vendors, the OEMs, the contractors, and the pioneers in the market. For example, we have here big deployment in Saudi Arabia related to the green hydrogen. And this is a combination between petrochemicals and electric sectors and renewable energies. And this is really a new and green field where there is no clear direction or regulation dictating the cybersecurity of these sectors. So I think this is falling on their labs. They should develop something to show their commitment to the customers.
Right. You've raised a very, yes, please.
Yeah, I totally agree with Fahad. The reason behind that is that when it comes to the self-regulation, it is kind of a spectrum, where at one side you have a policy maker who's going to regulate if you don't do it. On the other side of the spectrum is the organization who can self-regulate themselves because they know technology better. The reason behind that is that they are working on the technology. Self-regulation will be more faster because for the policy maker to regulate something, first they need to understand the technology, develop, and then implement. If the policy maker and the organization come on the same stage, then the self-regulation can be a kind of a shared responsibility where Fahad made a very particular point, which is apt for this particular self-regulation, where collaborating between the government, it also establishes a kind of a trust, and also it helps consumer to have a trust on that particular product, because we always talk about secure by default or by privacy by default, but when government and the organization are collaborating, it would be a kind of a compliance by default as well.
Yeah, very valid point. To follow up, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Kenneth, now we are talking about fines, we are talking about self-motivation, but how these organizations can shape up the regulatory compliances, because there's always a power play between the organizations, regulatory compliances, and the government. So how exactly organization and government can help shaping up these initiatives? And you've worked with a lot of government agencies and you've contributed to it. So I would want to start off with you.
Yeah, it's tough because there's, in America, for example, no one trusts the government, right? In fact, our whole philosophy is built on not trusting the government. Yeah. And so I think the government can, instead of sticks, use carrots to some degree and offer transparent guidelines and certifications that companies would want to be a part of to prove that, proactively prove that they can do something. And then I think the customer feedback loop is also really critical, because companies, ultimately they rely on their customers to purchase their products. And the more that consumers are aware, the better. And I think it's tough, but education and awareness is key to everything in life. I think especially as these questions get more and more complicated, and certainly in the era of AI and so much automation, we have to have a more literate public.
Right, I agree.
So in Marvel, we're operating in 13 different countries, so we have to comply with regulatory requirements from everywhere. So what I have seen that works better for us is in certain governments, you see that they have more of a consulting approach. So You have a national cybersecurity center that is monitoring even your perimeter and is going to alert you if they see some suspicious traffic, just being a second pair of eyes. So you feel like the government is trying to also support you in being secure. In other jurisdictions, regulators take a much more firm approach that you should have this checklist, or become of a checklist, and if you do not complete all the checklists, then you get some penalty. For me, I have seen a very successful model when you have more of a collaboration with the government. So the government is publishing some guidelines that help you to get your budget and everything else. They support you when you are operating, if this is something abnormal, if something maybe has been missed, or if they have some information about a foreign threat actor who is trying to attack the country, you can build some more security controls. And for me, that kind of collaboration with the government works better, but it needs to have complete trust between the entity and the government, which in many places, like in the US, that doesn't happen. So even in Europe, where everybody distrusts the governments. So.
Yeah. Mr. Boris, how's your experience in Singapore?
Look, I live in Singapore, but I work for an Indonesian company. I would say Singapore is very mature, basically on par with the US or Europe. Indonesia is a developing economy, and they cannot play with the same rules. If they play with the same rules, Indonesia will not develop fast enough. And so we have to balance the need for growth, not only for companies, but for the entire country. And that shapes a little bit the regulator's opinion. And as we are not a bank, we have some fintech services, but because we drive 2% of the GDP for the country, we get, and because we're the largest tech company, we get heard when we can help the government and the regulators prepare, rather than copy and paste what they see in Europe, adapt it to what is good for Indonesia, what's the next step that really makes a difference, that will not slow down growth, and what's the curve of maturity. How do we adjust from very risky, but a lot of growth, and we don't want very, very safe with very low growth. We want somewhere in the middle. And every time that a company fails, the regulators has to readjust and write a policy or adjust the fines to make it better for the long term for the market.
Right. Mr. Mihir?
So far, like coming from the energy utility, where we fall under Central Energy Authority guidelines, which comes under Ministry of Power in India, what we have done is that power can be balanced if there is a kind of a partnership with the government. So what we have done is that we have formed a partnership with a representative from the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center. That representative is a part of our quarterly meet. We discuss very transparently that what we are doing, what our plans are, and what we cannot do in next 1 year or in next 2 years. With that kind of a transparency and a partnership, not only a government is helping us to form a kind of a cybersecurity framework, considering the part that we have power grid lines, we have transmission, distribution, and generation. So that partnership is helping Tata Power as a company to create a kind of a framework where it's not kind of one size fits all, but yes, that particular framework is very much well aligned in kind of a partnership with the government. So yes, if we have a representative in our quarterly meet, it really helps.
Mr. Fahad?
Yeah, I want to address something away from this point, but it's a critical. For example, within NEOM, we take on our shoulder to be a pioneer, and we become adapting any new technologies in IT or non-IT. And also we want to go beyond that in innovation sectors. And we become innovative and adapting all innovative ideas. That's coming with the emerging challenge, which is the skill gaps. So skill gaps in the adapting the technologies itself, and regulating and self-regulating and co-regulating with the government. So this one challenging issue, I think we see it because we are heading in that direction. but that will encounter any organization will following this lead.
Now, a follow-up question to you only, because I remember talking about the smart cities and a few of those things backstage. So I would want to know how exactly the accountability can be traced and enforced in the companies which have these autonomous systems, IoT, OT, or even now we're talking about artificial intelligence. None of the panel is complete without artificial intelligence.
Yeah, let me take on the artificial intelligence first. Now, there is a challenge exists of how to regulating and complying the model that feeding the engine.
Yeah.
So I know in Europe they try to push for act to regulating the AI, but they are struggling because this is the secret sauce of the companies.
Yeah.
So this is a bit challenging, and this is something need to be addressed, maybe from the government level or country level, because that's cross-functioning with not only with technologies, also with the data, privacy, and other sectors. For the smart cities, again, it is evolving from regular cities, try to be digitalized, now try to be innovative and connecting things to the internet, then we're moving to the autonomous smart cities. And again, we came to the point where this is joint effort and forces between the proponent, the vendors, or like the major player in the sectors, and also we need to engaging the government from the early stage to be aware, fully aware of what's coming on their plate later, because that's becoming a practice everywhere else. So this is now it's becoming more of joint efforts, more than like independent efforts. So I'm repeating myself here, but this is really important and crucial.
Yeah. Anyone else who wants to contribute to this question?
For AI specifically?
Yes, please.
Okay, so again, yesterday I'm not sure if anybody was here during the Veracode presentation, but again, the challenge that we see with AI, especially when it comes to developing things, is that the AI models that we have today have been trained by software developers that are publishing code online. For the last 20 plus years, software developers have been creating insecure software. So most of the software that now an AI engine can create probably has security vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So until we manage to find a way to train those models with only secure code or teach them how to fix those mistakes, I think that the problem is going to be happening worse and worse.
Yeah. Mr. Kenneth?
I think he's bringing up some great points here. It's one of the things I think is to have both internal and external review of difficult problems, right? So there's the element of self-discipline, and then there's a request for an objective analysis of how I'm doing. And to me, it feels like a lot of the questions we're discussing today, they are truly complicated, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to require flexibility, thinking in terms of balance and frameworks, and flexible approaches. And of course, governments aren't known for that. They're known for bureaucracy and heavy-handedness. But I would suggest, though, that even startups, startups are singularly focused on succeeding and making money, so they also need some help from us, right? It's okay to make money, it's okay to have a great idea, but you have to operate within guidelines that are in the public interest, that are in consumers' interest, because if you're not, well, who are your customers going to be, ultimately?
Right. So Mr. Fahad actually raised a question, which is wonderful to the same point, especially around skill gaps. So I would start off with Mr. Fahad, that when we talk about skill gaps, especially in regulatory compliances, because today we see an attack. After 2 weeks, that will be redundant completely. Now, a regulator comes into picture after a breach, and he sees that it's not at all relevant. So how exactly company can train their own people and even contribute to a wider community so that we can have these regulations which are met by most of the companies, and we have a pool, or I would say a pool of talent where they can pick it up from?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, as I stated earlier, the threat landscape is evolving and rapid. And if we look at it from cybersecurity point of view and the skills that are required to detecting this threat landscape or responding to this threat landscape, now let me explain it in another way. Now, whatever you learn today in a cybersecurity, high likely will be irrelevant from 2 to 3 weeks up to 3 months.
Right.
And this is one fact. The other fact is this unrelevant information you can't overlook it because the might attackers he will utilize it somewhere. So you have to keep your policies and the standards, keep eye on these controls. The third, now this will become more difficult and challenging when you're talking about legacy systems.
Yeah.
Something from 40, 50 years old. And you can see the pile up of the policies and the standards and controls and the skills you need to develop in each domain and each sectors. This will be a burden on the organizations, on the regulators. So this is a pressing issue. To be honest, I don't have a magic word to solving the problem, but maybe I want to give the open question here, how that could be answered, or how this can be tackled. I think this is an interesting area, need to be looked at it carefully, and government, they should have a major role on that.
Yeah.
Actually, on that point, because again, sometimes legacy systems are good from a security side. So if you see in the US, there was a report in the military, but still a lot of the nuclear weapons in the US, they're still operated with some very old mainframes, but you have to put a floppy disk inside. You cannot find floppy disks in any shop, but that's what they use. Which is actually not such a bad thing, because again, those systems cannot be hacked. There is no connection to the internet, there is no antiviruses, there is nothing like that that can contaminate them. So sometimes some legacy systems are actually better for security. If you have less hackers knowing about them, less people can exploit them.
Right. Anyone else who wants to add? Yes, please, Mr. Mihir.
It's a kind of a question to the panelists where we are talking about the skill gaps, right? Be it IT, OT. Now, to bridge the gap when it comes to the skill gaps, what we are going to do is we are going to train them. We are going to have the assigned guidelines for the people who are working in the plants or sites, who are managing the SCADA, and also to the people who are managing the IT. While we do that, how do we make sure that we retain those employees after making sure that we bridge the gap? Because what happens is that while bridging the skill gap is easy, I'm not going to say that it's kind of a magic wand, which Fahad rightly mentioned, but what is the sustainability of it? How are we going to make sure that we sustain it, that after giving the training and then retaining those things, and how do we sustain the entire program?
Right. Ms. Boris, do you want to add something?
Yeah, about basically the skills gap. In Indonesia, we have a market that is developing, and so the skills in cybersecurity were probably inexistent 10 years ago, and we are part of, with partnership with universities, we are part of the driving force to make it better known as a topic, to build capabilities, to teach to students, but also to employees, and basically, after 2 or 3 years, when they leave and go to another company, slowly pollinate across the entire ecosystem. I think that's a beautiful story where you get the positivity of, ramping up the quality, the maturity through the collaboration with the public sector, the school system, but also private companies who are building the future of the economy in terms of cybersecurity talent.
Great. Dr. Kenneth, do you want to add something to it?
Well, one of the things that I think we should see as a positive way forward is diversity and inclusion. Because I think humans are pretty egocentric, I think, creatures. And it's so easy for us to assume that we know more than we know, and that we know everything. And one of the only ways to fix that is to focus on diversifying the workplace and including more perspectives, and more different kinds of people. And I think that's one of the ways that we can address the skills gap, because if we only hire people that are like us, we're doomed to fail.
Yeah, very valid point.
Very valid.
I think all of you have shared different perspectives from different countries. We have US, Europe, we have Indonesia, India, and Saudi Arabia. So that's really amazing to know that how exactly these regulatory compliance can be helped by the organization, by individuals, and how we can shape up in a bigger way, and especially the skill gap, the way we can fix that. Now, we are opening up if you have any question from the audience. Do we have any questions from the audience? All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all the panelists for sharing wonderful insights. Lot to learn from you, lot of things that we have learned today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.